It was midnight when my phone rang. I had just left a friend's party, heading home like any other night. But when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach dropped. It was Rachel, my best friend, calling in the middle of the night. "Sophie, don't go home. I mean it," she said, her voice shaking. I laughed at first, thinking she was just messing around. But what she said next made my heart stop. That night, I left town, and I never went back. Let me tell you a little about myself. I'm Sophie Daniels, a 28-year-old woman living in the same small town where I grew up. I never thought much of it. My life was simple, comfortable, and predictable. I had a good job, a steady boyfriend, and a small circle of close friends. Everything was fine. Well, that's what I thought until that night. The town was quiet as I drove home. It was late and the streets were empty, lit only by the dim streetlights lining the road. I had just left a party, feeling good, happy, from the conversations and laughter. The evening had been light-hearted, and I was ready to relax at home. I had a usual routine, nothing out of the ordinary. I knew every turn, every street, every face in this town. There was nothing I feared here. But then, my phone buzzed, and it was Rachel. Now, Rachel and I had been friends since high school. She's always been the one to watch out for me, the one who notices when something's off. She's protective, maybe a little too much sometimes, but I always appreciated it. That night, though, something felt different. When I picked up the phone, I expected her to be checking in, maybe telling me about her night, asking me how things were going, but instead, there was panic in her voice. She sounded urgent, almost frantic. "Sophie," she said, "don't go home. I mean it." At first, I thought she was joking. "Rachel, what's going on? I'm fine. Just heading home. It's late and I'm exhausted." But she didn't laugh. Instead, she sounded more serious, almost scared. "Sophie, I'm not kidding. Please, just trust me. Don't go home. Something's wrong." Now, if you know Rachel, you'd know that she doesn't scare easily. She's always the level-headed one, the one who keeps us both grounded. So hearing her sound like this, it made me stop. I laughed a little, trying to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just tired from the night. "Rachel, you're being dramatic," I said, trying to make light of it. But then she said something that made my heart drop. "I saw him again," she whispered. There was a pause, and my smile faded. "Who? What do you mean?" "I've been seeing him around town," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The man from the park, the one I told you about last year. He's been following you, Sophie. He's close to your place." The words hit me like a cold slap. The man she was talking about was someone who had made her uneasy for a while. We'd talked about it months ago, about the strange guy who had been showing up near the park where I walked, always lurking in the background, watching people, never really engaging. I thought she was overreacting back then, but hearing her voice crack with fear, I started to feel a chill creeping down my spine. "What do you mean he's close to my place?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but the anxiety was creeping in. "I don't know, Sophie," Rachel said. "I saw him outside your apartment building earlier. I don't know why, but I don't feel safe. He's been hanging around, watching your place." I looked out the window of my car, trying to shake off the growing unease. I lived in a safe neighborhood, a place where I'd never felt threatened. My apartment was cozy, familiar. I didn't expect anything like this to happen, but Rachel's warning was starting to sink in. The town I thought I knew, the life I had grown so comfortable with, was suddenly full of shadows I hadn't noticed before. I felt the knots forming in my stomach, the cold creeping up my spine. "Are you sure?" I asked. Now feeling unsure of myself, I could hear the fear in Rachel's voice, but I didn't want to believe it. It felt unreal, like something out of a horror movie. "Rachel, I'm fine. There's no reason for me to freak out." But Rachel wasn't backing down. "Sophie, please, just trust me. Don't go home. I've got a bad feeling about this." I took a deep breath, trying to push away the fear. But now, every little noise in the night seemed louder, and my mind started racing. I looked at the street ahead of me, the familiar road to my apartment. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same anymore. For the first time, I thought about turning around. Maybe I should stay with Rachel, figure out what was really going on. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was something more to this than I realized. But the truth was, I didn't want to be scared. I didn't want to believe that something sinister was lurking in the shadows of my small town. Still, Rachel's voice wouldn't leave my mind. "Please," she said again. "I am serious, don't go home." And for the first time, I thought, maybe I should listen to her. As I hung up the phone with Rachel, I felt an uncomfortable silence settle over me. I had told myself more than once that she was just being paranoid. I had convinced myself that it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But the more I thought about her warning, the more the feeling of unease started to take root in my chest. Why is she so scared? I kept asking myself. Rachel had always been protective, but she had never sounded like this before. There was an urgency in her voice that I couldn't ignore. I glanced at the dashboard of my car, the clock flashing 12:30 a.m. The streets were empty as I drove through the familiar neighborhood, each street lamp casting a soft, yellow glow across the pavement. My apartment was just a few minutes away, but with every mile I drove, the feeling of dread continued to grow. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head. "It's nothing, Sophie. You're fine. Just get home and go to bed," I told myself, but the tension in my shoulders wouldn't release. Rachel had been so certain, and the way she'd spoken about the man, that strange figure who had been hanging around my apartment building, was starting to take on a life of its own in my mind. I thought back to the times Rachel had mentioned him before, back when she first noticed him months ago. He had always been a passing concern, something we brushed off with a laugh or a quick change of topic. I never gave it much thought, but now that Rachel had mentioned him again, I couldn't help but wonder if I had been wrong to dismiss it all this time. I glanced in my rearview mirror. Nothing. The road behind me was empty, just the way it should be. I tried to calm myself. "You're just being paranoid. There's nothing out there. This is just Rachel overreacting," I kept telling myself. But despite my attempts to quiet my racing thoughts, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. I made a right turn onto the street leading to my apartment complex. The lights were dimmer here, and the road was quieter. As I approached the building, I saw the usual cars parked in the lot, the familiar sight of the building's exterior, lit by soft lighting. Nothing seemed out of place, but still, the pit in my stomach grew heavier. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, and I could feel my heartbeat quickening. Why did I feel like something was off? I pulled into the parking lot and parked my car. The place was as quiet as always, and the hum of the night seemed to amplify the unease building inside me. I couldn't see anything unusual. No suspicious cars, no strangers lurking around. Everything looked fine on the surface, but Rachel's words kept replaying in my head. "He's been following you. He's been watching your place." I sat there for a moment, my hand still on the gear shift, staring out at the dark apartment complex. The parking lot was empty except for a few parked cars, their headlights dimmed, casting long shadows across the asphalt. There were no signs of anything suspicious. I almost felt silly for being so worried. I had lived here for over a year, and nothing like this had ever happened before. But then, I remembered the way Rachel sounded on the phone. Her voice had been full of fear, almost pleading. She was scared for me, scared for my safety, and that was enough to send a chill down my spine. I tried to shake it off, but it wasn't easy. I had this sudden, overwhelming urge to just drive away, to not go back to my apartment, to listen to Rachel's warning. I got out of the car and locked it behind me, trying to push aside the unease that had settled into my chest. The soft click of the door locking seemed louder than usual in the quiet night. I walked toward the entrance of the building, my footsteps echoing as I crossed the parking lot. I reached for my keys, feeling the cold metal in my hand, but something stopped me before I could insert them into the door. I froze. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow move. For a split second, I thought I saw someone standing near the side of the building, just out of sight. I couldn't make out the figure clearly, but my heart skipped a beat. Was I imagining things? My pulse quickened as I stared at the spot where I thought I had seen movement, but the shadows were still and silent now. "It's nothing, Sophie," I told myself, forcing myself to breathe. "You're just overreacting. There's no one there. It's just a shadow." I didn't know how long I stood there, staring into the darkness. But the longer I stood in the parking lot, the more real the feeling of being watched became. I couldn't shake the thought that I wasn't alone, that someone I didn't know, was watching me. I finally pushed open the door, the cool air inside the building greeting me as I stepped in. But as I walked down the hallway to my apartment, the sense of being followed intensified. Every step I took felt like it was being measured, every sound amplified in the silence. The hallway was dimly lit, but the lights seemed to flicker, casting strange shadows along the walls. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I walked faster, trying to ignore the fear clawing at me. I reached my door and unlocked it, pushing it open quickly, but as I stepped inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Was someone outside my window? Was there someone in the building? I didn't know, but in that moment, I understood why Rachel had called me and why I couldn't ignore her warning anymore. I stood in the doorway of my apartment, the cool air from the hallway sweeping in as I stared into the quiet space I'd always called home. But tonight, it didn't feel like home. It felt unfamiliar, like the walls were closing in around me, and the silence was too loud. The feeling of being watched lingered in the air, clinging to me like a second skin, suffocating and cold. I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the couch or the curtains, but everything was still. Everything was quiet. Yet the unease wouldn't go away. Rachel's warning echoed in my mind, growing louder with every passing second. "Sophie, don't go home. I mean it." I saw him again. What was I supposed to do with that? I had trusted Rachel's instincts for years, but this was different. I couldn't just ignore it. If she was scared enough to call me at midnight, there had to be something more to this than I was willing to admit. My gut told me she was right. Something wasn't right, and I was too close to it to see it clearly. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and locked it behind me. But instead of heading straight to the couch like I normally would, I turned back to the window. The city lights outside looked beautiful, almost serene, but they didn't calm me down. My eyes kept darting back to the shadows, to the empty spaces I couldn't see clearly, wondering if someone was out there watching me. The paranoia I had dismissed earlier crept back in, stronger this time. What if Rachel had seen something I hadn't? What if there was someone lurking just outside my apartment, waiting for me to let my guard down? I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "You're being ridiculous, Sophie. Rachel is just being overprotective," I told myself. But deep down, I couldn't shake the fear that had settled in my chest. I thought about my earlier walk to the door, the way I had felt like I was being followed, even though I hadn't seen anyone. The shadows, the silence, everything seemed so much more ominous now. I needed to do something, anything, to make sure I wasn't overreacting. I grabbed my phone, almost instinctively, and dialed Rachel's number. She picked up immediately, her voice almost breathless on the other end. "Sophie, are you okay?" she asked, clearly anxious. "I don't know, Rachel," I replied, my voice shaky. "I got home and everything feels off. I keep thinking I'm being watched. I can't explain it, but it doesn't feel right." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke with urgency. "Sophie, don't stay there. Don't stay in your apartment tonight. Please. If he's been watching you, I don't want you to be alone. You don't know what he's capable of." Her words hit me harder than I expected. The panic in her voice, the way she begged me not to stay, made everything feel more real. My mind raced, trying to process everything. Was I in danger? Was this just some overreaction? Or was there something else, something darker, at play here? I glanced around the apartment once more, but instead of feeling comforted by the familiarity of my surroundings, I felt more trapped. The walls were closing in, and the space that had once been a place of solace now felt suffocating. I couldn't just stay here and wonder if Rachel was right. I needed to act, to take control of the situation, or I'd never be able to settle my mind. "I'll leave," I said, making up my mind in an instant. "I'm coming to you, Rachel. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Rachel's relief was palpable. "Sophie, I'm so glad you're listening. Please, be careful." As I grabbed my things, my purse, my phone, my jacket, there was no turning back. My hands were shaking, my heart racing with adrenaline. I had always believed that nothing could happen to me in my small town, that I was safe in the comfort of my home. But tonight had shaken that belief. I wasn't sure what was out there, but I wasn't willing to take the risk of finding out. I stepped out into the hallway, locking the door behind me. My footsteps echoed in the quiet building, each step feeling like it took me farther away from the life I thought I knew. I reached the stairs and hurried down, my thoughts spinning. Was he watching me right now? Was he out there, waiting? The questions swirled around in my mind, making my skin prickle. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the building remained eerily still. I reached my car and got inside quickly, starting the engine with shaky hands. As I drove through the quiet streets, I realized just how much had changed in a matter of hours. I had always felt secure in my town, but now it felt like a different world entirely. The people I knew, the places I trusted, seemed foreign to me. It wasn't just the fear of the man Rachel had seen. It was the fear that I had been living in ignorance, not paying attention to the things that mattered most. As I sped toward Rachel's apartment, my mind kept replaying the moments leading up to this. The phone call, the warning, the overwhelming fear that something terrible was waiting just around the corner. I had trusted my instincts, and they had led me to the right decision. I wasn't going to stay in a place that made me feel unsafe. I wasn't going to ignore the warnings any longer. Whatever came next, I had taken the first step toward protecting myself, and I wasn't going to look back. The night that began with an innocent phone call had turned into a pivotal moment in my life. I didn't know what awaited me in the days to come, but one thing was certain: things had changed, and I was no longer willing to ignore the truth, no matter how unsettling it was. By the time I reached Rachel's apartment, I felt like I had been holding my breath the entire drive. The streets, which had been eerily quiet just moments before, now felt oppressive. Every turn I made, every light I passed, seemed to carry an extra weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that I wasn't as alone as I wanted to believe. I arrived at Rachel's place, just as the clock struck 1 a.m. She was waiting for me by the door, her face pale, her expression tense. The moment I stepped out of the car, she rushed toward me, her arms pulling me into a hug, as if she were afraid I might disappear. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of worry. "I'm fine, I think," I replied, trying to steady my breathing. "But what the hell is going on, Rachel? What did you see? Why is this happening?" Rachel led me inside and shut the door behind me, locking it quickly. She didn't even bother turning on the lights, and the room remained dimly lit by the glow of streetlights through the window. As we sat down, Rachel looked at me with serious eyes. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, and I could see the fear still lingering in her expression. This wasn't just some harmless paranoia. Something had happened, and it was far worse than I had imagined. "I didn't want to tell you this over the phone," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I had to warn you. I didn't know what else to do. I've been seeing him again." "Who?" I asked, my heart pounding. "The man I told you about before. The one from the park. The one who always watches you. The one you told me not to worry about." Her voice faltered as she spoke, and I could hear the anxiety creeping in. I was silent for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. The man from the park. Rachel had told me about him once before, how she'd seen him standing in the distance, lingering by the park when I went for my walks. At the time, I had brushed it off as her overreacting. I never thought it was serious. After all, it was a small town, and we all knew each other. What were the chances of someone dangerous being so close? But Rachel was scared. I could see that now, and I had ignored her warnings. But Rachel, I don't get it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why now? I've been trying to figure out what to do, she said, her voice strained. But the more I watched him, the more I realized he was getting closer. And then, tonight, I saw him again. He was at your apartment building. He was just standing there, staring up at your window. My blood ran cold. I couldn't imagine someone lurking around my apartment like that. It felt unreal, like something out of a thriller movie. But here I was, sitting in Rachel's dimly lit apartment, trying to piece together the fragments of a horrifying reality I hadn't even wanted to face. I had to know for sure, so I went back, Rachel continued. I watched him from across the street. He didn't notice me, but he was looking up at your place, watching the lights in your apartment. I saw him leave a few minutes later, but I had this terrible feeling that he knew you were there, that he was waiting for you. I couldn't breathe. The idea that someone had been watching me, lurking in the shadows, was almost too much to process. How could I have been so oblivious? How had I not noticed the warning signs? Rachel's words felt like a punch to the gut. But why didn't you call the cops? I asked, my voice a mix of confusion and fear. I thought I could handle it, she said, looking down at her hands. But then tonight, something happened. I saw him again, this time at the cafe we always go to, and he was sitting just a few tables away, staring at me. When I left, I noticed he was following me, not right behind me, but far enough to make sure I knew he was there. I had to lose him before I came to see you. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Rachel's words hit harder than I expected. The man had been watching her, following her. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. And then it hit me. The fear Rachel had been carrying for so long wasn't just in her head. It was real. She was right. Someone had been watching me, and now, it seemed, he was watching Rachel too. Rachel, I don't know what to do, I said, feeling my voice crack. This is insane. I feel like I'm losing control of everything. I just want to feel safe again. I want to go back to normal. She took my hands in hers, her eyes locking onto mine. You can't go back, Sophie. You can't go back to your apartment. It's not safe. He's getting closer, and I'm afraid it's only a matter of time before he does something. We need to get out of here. We need to leave. Tonight. The urgency in her voice hit me like a wave. Leave town? The thought was almost impossible to grasp, but the fear in Rachel's eyes told me she wasn't just overreacting. She had seen something that I hadn't, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't just about being cautious. It was about protecting myself, about getting away from a situation that could escalate. I'm scared, Rachel, I whispered. What if he's already here? What if he knows where I am right now? I don't know, she replied softly. But we can't stay here. We have to leave, Sophie. Please. The reality of the situation hit me like a tidal wave. There was no more second guessing, no more pretending that everything was fine. I grabbed my purse, a small bag of essentials, and I didn't even look back. I didn't know where we'd go, but I knew one thing. I had to leave town, and I couldn't go back to my apartment. Not that night. Not ever again. As we walked out of Rachel's apartment, leaving everything behind, I realized that I was walking into an unknown future. The world I thought I knew, the safety of my own home, the town I'd lived in all my life was gone. And I had no idea where this path would lead, but I knew it was the only choice I had left. Rachel was right. I had to leave, and I never went back. Leaving that night was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Walking out of Rachel's apartment without looking back felt surreal. It felt like I was abandoning everything I had worked so hard to build. My life, my routine, the comfort I had in knowing exactly where I was. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the truth that had settled deep in my gut. Staying behind, ignoring Rachel's warning, would have been a far worse choice. The next few days were a blur. I stayed with Rachel, away from the apartment, away from the life I'd known for so long. My mind was flooded with so many questions. How could I have been so blind? How had I ignored all the signs? I couldn't stop replaying the moments when I felt uneasy, when something didn't feel quite right. But I brushed it off as paranoia. The phone call that night, Rachel's desperation, the fear in her eyes, those were all pieces of a puzzle I should have seen long before. We didn't know what had happened to the man who had been stalking me. But Rachel's careful observations had been enough to convince me that he wasn't just some harmless stranger. He had been paying attention to me, watching me, perhaps for longer than I realized. My apartment felt like a distant memory now, but it also felt like the place I could never return to. The comfort of my old life had been shattered, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. For the first few days, I stayed glued to the news, hoping to hear something about the man, anything that would confirm that he had been caught, or at least stopped from following me. But there was nothing, no word from the police, no updates, just silence. It left me feeling unsettled, uncertain of the next move, unsure of how long I would be able to stay in this state of limbo. I realized I couldn't stay in the small town where I had spent my entire life. It wasn't just about the man anymore. It was about my sense of safety, which had been completely stripped away. The idea that I'd been so unaware, that I'd allowed my world to become so fragile, haunted me. I was no longer in control. I couldn't go back to my old life as if nothing had happened. I had to make a decision. Stay and hope things would eventually return to normal, or leave and try to find peace somewhere else. The fear I felt every time I passed the town's familiar streets, the dread that followed me everywhere I went, told me there was no going back. I needed to escape, physically and emotionally. Leaving town wasn't easy. I packed a few bags, not knowing exactly where I'd go, but determined not to return to the place that had once been my safe haven. I told Rachel my decision, and while she understood, I could see the worry in her eyes. She wanted me to stay close to her, but she also knew that I had to do this for myself. I found a small apartment in a nearby city, far enough away from the place where I had spent so many years. It wasn't a grand decision. It was more of a necessity. I needed distance, not just from the town, but from everything that had triggered my anxiety. I needed to rebuild my life in a place where I didn't feel constantly on edge, where I wasn't watching over my shoulder, expecting someone to be watching me. The first few months were difficult. I felt like a stranger in a new city, unsure of myself, and uncertain about my future. I didn't have the comfort of my old friends, my family, or the familiarity of my neighborhood. Everything was different, and it was harder than I imagined. But slowly, as the days went by, I started to feel a shift. The constant fear that had followed me like a shadow began to fade. I started to breathe again. I kept in touch with Rachel, of course, but I couldn't go back. I couldn't face the people who had known me before. It was like stepping into a world that no longer fit, no longer felt right. It was easier to build a new life from the ground up without the baggage of my past creeping in at every turn. Over time, I began to realize that leaving wasn't just about escaping the fear. It was about reclaiming my sense of control. I had been living in a state of denial, ignoring the signs that something was wrong. I had let myself believe that everything was fine, that my world was secure, when, in reality, I had been vulnerable. The lesson I learned in the hardest way possible was that trusting my instincts, listening to the warnings, even when they didn't make sense, was crucial. I had ignored my own inner voice for too long, and in doing so, I had put myself at risk. When I look back now, I realize how much that decision changed me. It wasn't just about moving away from a dangerous situation. It was about learning to trust myself again. It was about embracing change and stepping out of my comfort zone, even when it was terrifying. Leaving town was the hardest decision I ever made, but it was also the most empowering. I learned that fear isn't something to run from, but something to face head on. It's okay to be afraid, but it's not okay to let fear control your life. I also learned that safety isn't just about physical protection. It's about emotional well-being. Trusting the people who truly care about you and learning to listen to their warnings can save you from making mistakes you might regret. Now, months later, I've started to rebuild my life. I've found peace, a sense of belonging in a new place, and I've learned to never ignore my instincts again. It's been a long journey, but the most important lesson I've learned is that sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to leave everything behind. And that's okay. It's part of healing. And now I'm living proof that you can start over, no matter how impossible it may seem.